So welcome everyone. Hope you had a great new year and a wonderful holiday break. My name is Clarissa. I'm the program volunteer coordinator for the Puget Sound Estuarium, and this is our Discovery Speaker Series. We like to invite artists, educators, scientists, and Earth advocates to share about their current work or organization to help spark conversations in our community. So have your listening ears on, have your brain working so that you can ask some questions at the end so that you can be engaged with this conversation. We host Discovery Speaker Series October through March. And so this is our fourth one of this season, and we have two more after this. We will have that 15 minutes at the end for any questions that you may have. So feel free to type that into the Q&A. For those on Facebook, they would type it into the comments. If you have that need for something to do with your hands, you can download the coloring page at our website. If you go to this event, there'll be a link in the bottom for the coloring page to print out. The one today is of a drawing of Priest Point Park, which we have now renamed as Squaxin Park. And so we'll get to hear more about them today. Again, if you have to leave early or know someone else who will want to listen to this, follow us on YouTube. But today, unfortunately, Charlene isn't feeling too well, and so graciously, Jeremiah George has stepped in. He is the assistant director at the Squaxin Island Museum. You may have seen some of his work around downtown in our community. He is an artist and a photographer. But today, he'll be talking about the Squaxin Island Tribe and the Steh-Chass. So Jeremiah, you can take it away.
Isko, Clarissa. Thank you, Clarissa. Hot Slechel Golapudi Ished. Greetings, everyone. Kaptilai Titsta. My traditional given name is Kaptilai, which I received from my father's side in my Yakima tribe side that I share with my father traditional name. My taxpayer name is Jeremiah George. I'm the assistant director at our Squaxin Island Museum. It's good that we gather together today. And a little bit about our tribe and our museum. Of course, we have always been here. Since time immemorial is a phrase that Indigenous peoples across the world utilize in referencing how long or how permanent their people have inhabited their traditional territories. So if I can start with sharing a screen without any problems. Which I'll need some permissions, which it's okay. If those permissions can be given, I'll wait a second for that. But we, the Squaxin Island Tribe, are signatories of the Medicine Creek Treaty, which was signed in 1854. I believe it was around Christmas Eve of 1854. When Governor Isaac Stevens was on his fast and furious treaty-making tour, he started with the Medicine Creek Treaty. And so that includes us at Squaxin, which we are a series of 7 bands of peoples, which tie into our traditional territory, which I'll expand upon in a second. But other neighboring tribes that were included in the Medicine Creek Treaty are Nisqually and Puyallup. As happens commonly throughout the United States, we had some issues with medicine or with the treaty negotiations, in the business that was led between the two parties, the U.S. government and our indigenous peoples. Of course, there's a language barrier, though at the time in the mid 1800s, our people were familiar with the push west coming into our territory, had even become good friends with some of the non-tribal people who were coming in and setting up homesteads in our traditional territories. But there were still some barriers of language, of course, because the assimilation policy and efforts hadn't really begun in our territory at that time. So most of our tribal people still utilized our traditional tongue or language, which is referenced in English as Lashute seed or Twelve shoot seed, which is one of the many or few ways that we enunciate our language. And our traditional language, Twelve shoot seed, covers all of the inner Salish Sea, Southern Salish Sea tribes. So we are all the way on the interior of that Southern Salish Sea. And it goes north just about to the Canadian border. I believe the Skagit tribe is about the northern reach. So at that time, of course, there was that barrier, but there were actually Indian agents who were fairly fluent in our language. But the United States government still chose to utilize Chinook jargon, which is, well, at that time was mostly used for trade interactions in our region. Chinook actually is a tribe that exists, and the language is still in practice and in evolution and in use in indigenous communities. But at that time, it was in our region thought of as a business language, and the vocabulary at that time was limited to maybe 300 or so words. So there was an attempted and purposeful veil upon the negotiations. As I said, there were Indian agents who were fluent in our language, but it was not utilized during the negotiations. And as I had stated, there might have been some examples of good relationships, but there were still some cultural barriers, maybe not common concepts of land ownership. And so there were some tensions because of that, because of the non-tribal people coming in and setting up homesteads and saying, this is our land now. And so there were harsh punishments for minor infractions. People, indigenous people taking livestock, for example, being harshly punished. So, and then there was also another example of similar tension just east of the mountains with the Yakima. I think it was Chief Steh-Chass, where there's a little bit of nervousness on behalf of the United States, because there was a concerted effort for land being made available for the settlers coming west, but there was still a lot of high numbers of our indigenous people in our traditional territories. So there were some high likelihood of conflict that could happen. So when the treaty came about, though we we look upon it as different examples of giving up a lot of our land or having that stolen or removed from us, to be able to exist as a people, rather than having concerted effort otherwise. But we are very fortunate that we had leadership at the time who made sure that there were specific inclusion of treaty elements that gave us essentially access to continue to live as we always have and have access to our traditional rights, hunting, fishing, food and medicine gathering. Though that reaffirmation didn't really come until way later, but that's a topic for another time. But so the negotiation happened, the treaty was signed, but there were some leaders who didn't agree with the treaty, and they had left the treaty negotiations and didn't sign the treaty, but their name was still on the roster. So there is some question in the accuracy or legitimacy of some of the leaders who were listed on the roster. Trying not to get too much into expanding upon that, but this led to another similar addition to that tension, and this ended up leading to what became known as the Puget Sound Indian War of our region. That was primarily led by Chief Leshai and his brother Quaimuth, and it was more of a series of small skirmishes, because when you think of the term war, you think of big battles, big production, country versus country, but it was quickly labeled as a war because of a quick and fast label of hostile Indians who didn't agree to report to a small reservation that wasn't very well supplied for all of the people that the different reservations housed. But anyway, long story short, the United States government safest course of action that they believed was to gather up all of our people from our expansive territories. Oh, here now I can share my screen. So give me 1 second. Okay, so okay. Let me get a thumbs up from Clarissa if you can see this well. Okay. All right. So our expanse of our usual and accustomed territory goes well beyond the Squaxin Island and well beyond our current community hub, which is located in between the city of Shelton and Olympia. We call our community Small Valley Camelchi or Wabashi. But where our casino is and where our tribal center and our administrative buildings, tribal government buildings are located, are centralized. But the expanse of our territory actually goes further, goes up into Carr Inlet, which I try to reference as well as I can, the different locations of some of the towns nearby. So Carr Inlet, if you're not familiar, that Gig Harbors, kind of on the other side of the inlet. Purdy is up there, of course, Fox Island, and then Case Inlet up there by Grapeview. Victor's also there. And then Hammersley, of course, that's where Shelton is. And then Totten Inlet, and that is kind of where we are. Camelchi, where I referenced earlier, where our community is centralized. And then Eld Inlet, which is kind of in between Olympia and Camelchi. Steamboat Island is a community around there as well. Of course, Budd Inlet, and that's where the city of Olympia is, down all the way on the inside of that. And then Henderson Inlet, which the Woodward Bay Conservation Area is out there. And Zittle's Marina is on the other side of the point, just outside of Henderson Inlet. So the United States government chose to gather up all of our people and confine our people onto the island because of the Puget Sound Indian War that had happened. And the island was essentially used as an internment camp. And our people were forced to stay there. There are stories of our people being shot at from the windows of the Capitol building for attempting to leave, even though the Squaxin Island, even today, doesn't have any real freshwater source. There's kind of a trickling stream that can be accessible during different times of the year when the tide is low enough, but it isn't really sustainable. But after the Puget Sound Indian War concluded with both Chief Leschi being hung for a war crime, which was really something that happened in battle, and that's something that he was exonerated for maybe 16 or 18 years ago, I think. But anyway, and also his brother Quaimuth was murdered in the governor's mansion, I believe. So those leaders were done away with. The Puget Sound Indian War tension calmed down, and then our people were allowed to leave the island. So just a little bit of information on the expanse of our territory, some of our history. We are, again, part of the Medicine Creek Treaty, but I don't think what people connect to enough is that because island is included in our name of our tribe, our usual and accustomed territory actually goes well beyond the island. The island is only 1.5 miles by maybe 4 miles wide, so it's fairly small. But let's see, I wanted to cover the traditional names of each of the inlets. So I mentioned Carr Inlet. Traditional way of saying that, though, the phonetic English spellings come from I think they were government surveys or government records, which aren't too far off, I suppose, but our indigenous language has a lot of different different sounds than the English language. So Carr Inlet, the traditional way of saying what the ancestral name of the inlet is Steh-Chass, and then Case Inlet, and this is where our tribal name comes from. The name of our tribe comes from is Squaxin, but the older way of saying it was similar to how you say it in English, Squaxin. So the older way would be Squaxin. But now with the evolution of our language, which is still in use, still in practice today by all of our tribes in the Southern Salish Sea, it has evolved to Squaxin. And then Hammersley Inlet is Seh-Chass. And then Totten Inlet is Tepee-Sud. And then Eld Inlet is Squaxin. And Budd Inlet. Some people are familiar with the phonetic spelling, which some have learned how to say the English phonetic inflection on it. People say Steh-Chass, but the traditional way of enunciation is Steh-Chass. Steh-Chass. Again, for Budd Inlet, Steh-Chass. And then finally, Henderson is Duff-Cha-Cha-Ash. Duff-Cha-Cha-Ash. And going back to the phonetic spellings of them, They're not too bad. They're decent attempts at making those different sounds in our language. Something that we practice on is transitioning really quick. So I wanted to turn it back to Clarissa really briefly while I switch over to my mobile device to continue with the rest of my presentation. So please bear with me while we get that transition really quickly. Okay, I'll be right back.
So yeah, we're gonna get a virtual tour of the Squaxin Island Museum. I've been there in person and it's a really cool experience to just see all of the big, beautiful murals they have there and all of the cool artifacts that they have. So you're gonna get a virtual tour today, but I do encourage you to go in person to visit them. And he's back.
Okay. I don't know if I need a moment to be pinned or if that's automatic or fairly immediate. Hoping Clarissa can hear me okay. Yeah, okay. Let me turn my camera around. So currently I am here at our Squaxin Island Museum. This architectural style was inspired by our traditional homes. Some people call that plank house or long house. And you can tell by our long cedar log beams that we have. This is, again, inspired upon our traditional housing. And the name that we placed upon our museum is Codigus Alt. Codigus Alt. And that translates to home of sacred belongings. Codigus Alt. The face of our building is inspired after the Thunderbird, which is a traditional story character in many tribes throughout the United States. Let's see, since we're focused on the water, so something I don't know. Well, this is probably a good group of people, but in general, I myself wonder, because of the uniqueness of our region here with our Southern Salish Sea. I think maybe people don't make a connection, of course, unless you go out on the beach. You spend a lot of enough time in our region, but having an inner sea is a little unique. But again, we try to reference it as much as we can as the sea, because there are, tides. We have tides here. We have sea life. All that encompasses in having those ecosystems. Let's see. Our first part of our permanent exhibit called Hall of the Seven Inlets. Again, let's see, one more time for reference what I had mentioned earlier. So each of our murals, we have a series of 7 of them, carry the name of each of the inlets. So this one, Henderson Inlet. In phonetics, it's Nusachotl. But each of these murals have a traditional story. Some people call them myths or legends, which I don't think really encompasses the value or the worth of them. So for an example, this one here is the Great Flood story, traditional story that's common throughout the world, common in our region. But there are actual geologic evidence in our region of a significant flood that happened at the recession of the glacier at the last ice age, where there was an ice dam that had gave way and led to a significant flood event in our area. So, so just an example of one of our traditional stories linking back to having some basis in fact. Let's see, I wanted to do a time check real quick to make sure we don't extend out too far. So being here in the inner Salish Sea, we have a lot of maritime focus and maritime culture. And in that unique position that we have as tribes that have always tried to be good relatives or stewards, some people refer to it as, but I think stewards is maybe not encompassing enough, as our responsibility as you know, fellow residents of our ecosystems, because we have traditions that speak back to us being like family rather than having a dominant position where we rule over everything, where everything is here for us. Our traditional cultures of our indigenous peoples speak to that position more as being co-residents of, co-inhabitants of. So in that stewardship, in that responsibility that we have as family members of our natural world, and because of the reaffirmation of our treaty rights that happened with the Judge Bolt decision in the 70s, that allows us to have access to our traditional ways of life, again, with hunting, fishing, food and medicine gathering, as we had always done. In the evolution of, and it also has association and connection to tribal gaming. And tribal gaming is something that has benefited our tribes, though per capita, I have to mention, per capita, tribal gaming isn't necessarily commonplace throughout the world, throughout the United States. That really, casinos are really few and far between. So I know sometimes in our region, some tribal association or conceptualization of some, in some people's minds, is that we have casinos and that we have economic benefits from that. And really per capita throughout the United States, that's really not the case, because not many tribes have that benefit. But those of us that do have that benefit, we are able to have an economic role and impact, and that brings us to having a seat at the table for some of the decisions that are made in our state, in our federal government. Of course, that links back to a lot of our treaty rights and treaty practices. So, so as we do, as in our responsibility, each of our inner Salish Sea tribes try to do as best we can to be good relatives to our natural world. So in that effort, we have some photos here on this mural panel of, let's see, for an example, we have a natural resources department at our Squaxin Island Tribe. So in an effort to try to replenish or enhance the salmon runs that return to our streams and creeks and rivers, we have a fish farm where we have, and these are native fish, native salmon that come. I know there's some recent negative focus on non-native fish, which is definitely detrimental, harmful. But we have native salmon raising at our Squaxin Island salmon net pens, where we raise fingerlings to a certain size, and then we put them into a fish. Let's see if we can get a good shot of this here. And then we distribute them to streams and creeks and rivers to try to replenish and increase the salmon runs that return every year. So there's also a photo of someone doing surveys of streams and creeks. So we try to do as best we can to maintain awareness of the returning salmon, of so that we can adjust our efforts accordingly at the salmon net pens. We maintain shellfish beds. There's a historic photo of someone with a gooey duck, and before I learned what a gooey duck was, what it really meant, I was always kind of confused. Like, gooey, I mean, yeah, it is gooey, I guess, but it's not a duck, so I don't know where that term came from. But it really comes from a word in our traditional language, and it's originally announced or pronunciated as gui duck, gui duck, gui duck. So we maintain shellfish beds. We try to do as best as we can to make sure that there are food sources, of course, for us to benefit from, to provide for our families, but also for those fellow family members to maintain their important role in our ecosystems. Let's see here. So there are a few photos of some of those things that we do. Some photos of well, what's now known as Salish Seafoods, of our tribal members harvesting gooey duck, of our late elders clam digging. Oh, here's another legend, the clam legend, and this basically talks about how Raven, who is a key important character in a lot of different traditional stories, and there is one of the stories about how Raven took people in a clamshell and distributed them throughout the different waterways of Salish Sea, which Salish Sea is pretty expansive. It goes beyond just our southern reaches of the southern Salish Sea. But so just another example of marine culture in our traditions. We have a petroglyph here. Not sure how well it shows up on my camera here or the feed, but this is another example of our permanence in our region, in our traditional, usual, and accustomed territory. These are dated several hundreds years old. There's some ideas about what the different meanings might be, and that honestly isn't my specialty, so I couldn't really speak to that, but I'm sure there's a lot of research, a lot of information that others might have. But again, it shows, because they're several hundreds, if not thousands of years old, shows how long we have been here. Oh, I should mention former Secretary of State Ralph Monroe discovered some signs of ancient ancestors from Squaxin activity on his land. And I'll walk over to the model. Hopefully the glare doesn't come too much. He found some remnants of a fish trap or fish weir on his waterfront. So there's a model here of the fish trap. There were posts like this one here, put deep into the mud as the tide went out. There's an access point where essentially a gate would be closed after the tide came in. Salmon came in as the tide went in so far, and then the gate would be put in place to close, and then it was a way of trapping salmon for a food source, of course. So former Secretary of State Ralph Monroe knew that there were some ancient signs of ancient activity. So he worked with the tribe in the South Puget Sound Community College to do a archaeological dig that was maintained for a few years. It's been a number of years since it's been active, fortunately, but we have some of those ancient artifacts here. Some photos of some of the different extractions. Some of the highlights of the extractions of the site, which we put a name on the site of Was, which means a place to come together and share. So some of the highlights, let's see, there's one here of a cedar bark gill net, hand woven cedar bark gill net. So I think one of these exhibit displays mentions, I think 500 to 700 years is how old these have been dated. So here's more pieces of a cedar bark gill net. Some of the bones and things that were found. There was a lot of basketry that was taken out. The idea behind, or the theory behind what was discovered, or what the site actually was in ancient times, was that it was a processing site for shellfish. And of course, the fish trap was there too, but and it had been consistently occupied for hundreds of years. So again, it goes back to our permanency of being in our usual and accustomed territory for millennia, or since time immemorial, as tribal indigenous people refer to it as. Let's see. To show a couple of other things. So we are a people centralized around the inner southern Salish Sea, and our culture is focused around those elements. Something that we are getting back to this year in 2023 is the annual tribal canoe journey. The canoe journey has dual origins. Up on the British Columbia, Canada side. Time check real quick. Go 5 more minutes. Okay. Well, let me check with Clarissa. 5 more minutes still, Clarissa? Or did I go beyond the time?
We are exactly at 15 after, so If you've got any more you want to add in the next couple minutes, you can. Otherwise, we can go to questions.
Okay, so the annual canoe journey has dual origins. Basically, there were centennial celebrations that took place and Indigenous peoples in Canada and in Washington State for the Washington State Centennial in 1989, and the Expo 86, which is like a centennial celebration in Victoria, British Columbia. The Indigenous people wanted to show that we are still, our cultures are still living, our people are still alive, and so the canoe was a central part of that. So a centennial celebration in 1989 in Seattle had a few tribes travel by canoe to the centennial celebration. And similarly happened in Expo 86, which was also a World's Fair, to my understanding. A few tribes traveled by canoe, stopping at each Indigenous community along the way, and inspired a cultural revitalization, essentially. So there's some photos here of the modern canoe journey that has revitalized, has became an annual thing since I think it was 1998. I believe is the year that it became annual event. Of course, pre-pandemic, but now there's a return to that in 2023. Hopefully this summer. Pandemic things still are, maintain at a level for our communities to be able to do it comfortably and safely. So anyway, just a reference to some of our cultural efforts. Yeah, I guess we can get to the question portion.
Yeah. I'll get things started with my first question for you is, when is Squaxin Island Museum open to the public and how much is it admission?
Admission is $5 for anyone, but free students are free. It's K through 12. Elders or seniors are $3. We're open Tuesday through Saturday, 9 to 5. It's always a good idea to call ahead, just to make sure that we are a small organization. We have a small staff, so at times we have things that impact our schedule. So it's always good to call ahead to make sure that we don't have any early closures, or that our staff is still available. So yeah.
Okay, thank you. Now to get with, we've got questions coming in from our Zoom participants. How long were the Squaxin Island people confined to the Squaxin Island?
I think it was at least, I think maybe 2 or 3 years, or a year to 3 years. For the duration of the Puget Sound Indian War, at least, and I knew it took some time. Chief Leshai and his following were pursued for a time by militia, by the U.S. Army. There was, I think, battle in Seattle or something that was one of the skirmishes that took place. So at least, yeah, I think 1 to 3 years. For some reason, I'm spacing on that right now, but for the duration of the Puget Sound Indian Wars, that's how long. Because, as I said earlier, that even though there were a good, decent number of non-tribal people coming in with their homesteads and setting up their own lands, our indigenous people still outnumbered non-tribal people. So, though of course there was a threat of army, but that was the reason for confinement or internment.
Okay, another question. Back to the canoe journey. How can non-tribal people participate in the 2023 one?
2023, I failed to mention it's going to be hosted by the Muckleshoot tribe. Auburn, I think, is the city that their tribal offices are centralized. We hosted the canoe journey actually, well, coming up on 11 years ago now in 2012, although we gave permission for Nisqually, which is our neighboring tribe, to utilize Swantown Marina, downtown Olympia, in 2016. So there were two landings that took place in the last, well, coming up on 11 years. When we hosted in 2012, there were 104 canoes from different tribes that came in and participated in the traditional ceremony, canoe landing ceremony. And what we discovered quickly is that in order to handle that amount of people and the crowd who greeted them on land, which I think it was probably in total maybe 6,000 to 8,000 people, that we had to work with the surrounding neighbor infrastructure to set up everything for the amount of traffic, for the crowd handling, to set up bleachers, to do traffic control, to have safety for the water traffic as well. So it came down to a lot of need for numerous volunteers. So if you go to Paddle to Muckleshoot, search that online. I don't have the website now, but I know they have a Facebook page. I think it's Tribal Canoe Journeys. They have a website. I know Muckleshoot has a website, and I think it's probably something like Paddle to Muckleshoot. So if you Google that, you'll find the information. But there will be opportunity for volunteer for their canoe journey hosting, because similarly they'll have to do infrastructure set up for hundreds, if not thousands of people.
Nice. So yeah, if people are interested, you can go to their website and look up volunteer opportunities. We had another question. What was the relationship between the tribes like prior to colonization?
I think, some of the documented I think it was Peter Puget who wrote in his journal that, we were a welcoming, peaceful people. And though, of course, there's example of some of our traditional stories of some conflicts, but I think in general, we, our culture is centered around humility and welcoming and accepting and taking care of each other, and again, like our cultural responsibility as family members to our natural world. I think our traditions and our customs and our culture and heritage has always been that way. That we take care of each other as best we can in a good way. But of course, there were conflicts that happened. So yeah, I don't know if that answers the question, but I think they were good relations. I know for myself. So where we are located, in terms of our, traditionally where there were trading routes that cut through the mountain range to the east of us. So we have traditional kinships that are still in place today, but they were likely in place for many millennia. So myself, I mentioned earlier, my father's family is from Yakima, and I know that that's commonplace for other indigenous people in our region, that we have family ties, kinship ties to the eastern Plains tribes, as well as those tribes to the west of us who live along the ocean and down at the Columbia River as well. So our people have interacted for many millennia, though the treaty situation, Medicine Creek treaty situation, might have been kind of hairy. Our people were aware of the push west, did know that some people were removed from their traditional territory and placed way far away from where they had lived before. So our people had interacted far and wide, and so I think that probably wouldn't be possible if we weren't a welcoming culture. So.
Okay, another question we have is, does the tribe give Lushootseed language classes to pass down to future generations?
We've been involved here at the museum for a few different efforts. There's a challenge in the fact that we don't have any living first language fluent speakers. So people who were born and immersed immediately into a home or a family that only spoke our traditional language. So there's challenge in that. Although we do have the benefit of the expanse of the language being so far, including the other tribes along the southern side of the sea. So we have the ability to network and learn from each other, and we're trying now to get some programs going. Of course, things need funding for staffing, for all of the different elements that are entailed with language revitalization, which is not simple at all, especially in a modern world where English is primary language spoken. So there are efforts. We're hoping to increase them, hoping to expand as always, but there's definitely challenges in that.
And another question is, what place does the island hold in the life of the tribe? And are there any plans for its future now that I think only like a couple people are living on the Squaxin Island still?
Though it has a connection to some of the trauma that had taken place, I think the different wrongdoings that had happened around the Puget Sound Indian Wars. I think the situation of being interned on Squaxin Island isn't unique, and maybe not even the worst example of some of the things that we had experienced. So though there is some of that trauma linked to that experience, I think we hold the island in high regard because it also is a symbol of our resiliency. The things that we persevere through, that we push through to still be here today, to exist as Indigenous people, and to have a community, to have opportunity to have reconnection or revitalization. And actually the last year-round resident was probably back in the 50s. So there are different places on the island where families are associated with. So in the summer, we'll go out and camp wherever our family area might be. During the fishing season, we'll utilize some spots for camping. So it's a little bit of an easier time to deal with that regimen of fishing for food source or for income. So The island is still in use, though people may not live there year round. It's still in use. It's still a symbol of our resiliency that we hold in high regard.
And then one last question. What is your favorite exhibit in the museum?
My favorite exhibit? I don't think I could really narrow it down. I think they all complement each other. I mean, myself, I had a role in our opening in 2002. We opened our doors to the public in November. And I was involved with setting up our murals that were digitally created with a computer, but then were printed on big plotters that did sections of the murals. So that's, of course, that was a project that I hold dearly, but I don't think I could say one has more value than the other, because I think they all complement each other. And though we have a preview currently of a forthcoming exhibit focused on the missing and murdered Indigenous peoples. We have a photo preview of some of the photos of that exhibit, still in development, but there is a growing movement in our region, including in Canada, to try to deal with the state of emergency of our missing and murdered Indigenous people that we have experienced in our well, throughout the United States, really. We're kind of there's some associations with some of the extractive industry that happened that there are connected dots to, but we're working now. People might have, in general, our Indigenous people in our region are working to tend to that emergency. I don't know if people heard, but recently, over the last maybe 6 months or so, there is like an Amber Alert type of system in our state that was enacted, and some of those efforts are still taking place. So if you want, please Google that, missing and murdered Indigenous people, and you'll find more information about that. And please come to our museum and check out the preview of that exhibit. But yeah, we're always trying to develop more of our exhibits. We have some that are more permanent than others, but yeah.
Well, thank you, Jeremiah, for stepping in and being our speaker today. I really appreciate that you're able to join us last minute. And then thank you to everyone who joined us via Zoom and Facebook Live. You had great questions. The website was muckleshootcanoejourney.com. One of our participants looked it up, so you can look into that to volunteer for the next canoe journey. And then send us your photos. I finished the coloring page here. You can send us your coloring pages. We'd love to see them. And then you can follow us on Facebook and YouTube to get notified when we post this recording, so you can share it with friends and family. And then you can join us for the next one on February 2nd. You can follow us on Facebook or check our website for when we post the link for you to sign up for that one via Zoom, or you can join via Facebook Live. Hopefully we'll get that issue figured out. And then this is the last month that we have our Orca exhibit, or our Orca Odyssey exhibit. So if you want to check that out too, we've got a virtual speaker on a Saturday, and then the last day of the month is going to be a free admission day. So Tell all your friends, tell all your family. And then we also have a book about the exhibit for sale that you can purchase as well, so that you can keep reviewing and learning more about orcas. If you have any more questions, I don't think we were able to answer them all because we ran out of time. You can contact Jeremiah or Charlene at the Squaxin Island Museum. Give them a visit. See those beautiful murals. They are magnificent up close in person.
Thank you. We also are on Facebook, and we also have a website. So, and we have some events starting up in May with our annual museum golf tournament benefits. So please look forward to those announcements. Stay tuned for those on our Facebook page and our website. We also have a major native art auction in the fall. So those announcements will be forthcoming.
Sounds good. I can't wait for that art auction. That one looked cool last year. Thank you everyone for joining. I hope you have a good rest of your evening.
Thank you.